I hoped that fate would choose me to save my son, but I can't. So while I focus on him, I'm choosing you to run my business.
About that whole Meredith, the bridesmaid story, I'm not the bridesmaid. I'm the bride, Olivia.
What? Your Princess Olivia?
You see, ever since Silver died, my mum's depended on me. Every time you bring him up, makes her upset. I don't want to hurt you, Auntie Goldie. But if you keep trying to get me into trouble, you'll be an angel. Forever.
Hollyoaks is in 6th place in my soap opera rankings for December 2022. And honestly, this show has become quite the pain in the arse sometimes. And that is what we're going to talk about today. I feel like 6th, 5th, and 4th place, they have something in common. You know, they're not completely as terrible as the bottom 3 right now, because at least the middle 3 all have at least one good story going on. You know, the rest of the show might be crap, but they all have at least one good story going on. We might as well talk about the good story first, and then we'll get to the other crap. The whole incel Eric story, I've talked about it a lot over the past few months. How Eric and his hatred for women, and they've really been going hardcore on the whole Reddit situation with him being on this like online forum, which is supposed to be like Reddit, and the whole the levels to the incels as well, which I've never really heard about before. But they've clearly done their research with this story. And at the beginning of December, it felt like Verity was getting through to Eric because she had finally caught on to what he was doing, and Verity wants to make sure Eric and Mason are apart. And yeah, Eric is finally changing. Eric is becoming, they call it blue-pilled, which I guess is that he is making progress on the whole situation that he finds himself in, and him feeling like nobody wants him, and his depression coming out as anger towards women. But then, of course, we'll talk about this in a separate story, Verity gets killed. So the whole progress Eric is making thanks to Verity, she ends up getting killed. And so now Eric doesn't really have that person anymore to talk to help get through to him. Plus, Verity made a message on Maxine's phone talking about Eric, which made Eric seem like he was guilty of everything Maxine had been saying he was guilty of, which is actually true. He was guilty of drugging drinks. So, of course, Eric goes into a tailspin. He becomes black-pilled, which is just giving up all hope. And yeah, I think they continued to do a good job with this incel story with Eric. He was making progress, and now it seems to be taking a turn for the worse, thanks to Verity being killed. Now let's get to Verity being killed, because of course Eric would be a suspect in her death. But no, this show, Hollyoaks, a couple years ago they had the old lady serial killer going on tied to the McQueens. For whatever reason, they love to tie serial killer storylines to the McQueens. Like, it hasn't gotten old by this part. But the show decided, the old lady serial killer was bad enough. Let's outdo ourselves. Let's have a 9-year-old serial killer, because that's not absurd, right? So Bobby, of course, has been, they've turned Bobby into this weird kid, basically. We saw him kill Silver by not helping him when the whole explosion happened at the beginning of the year. And then he killed again. And now this time the 9-year-old kid's able to push a fucking bookshelf onto Verity, which injures her. and of course eventually leads to her death as well because of complications. I hate it. I hate it so much. I think it's so dumb. It really speaks. This is a terrible storyline. Let's be clear. This is a terrible storyline with Bobby, and it does speak to the bottom three, though. Like, this storyline is so bad and absurd, and yet I do feel like the writing on Emmerdale and on Bold and the Beautiful and on Young and the Restless is somehow worse than this. But it is. It is worse. But this storyline itself is pretty bad. Now Bobby is turning his sights on Felix because Mercedes and Felix have been getting close. So he tried to light a fire to the shop that Felix owns, and DeMarcus got caught in it, but he was saved by Prince. And Bobby was on video, and Felix found out about that, called the police. Mercedes, though, in desperation to save her kid, ends up knocking out Felix and trying to run away with Bobby, but the year and December at least ends with Bobby being taken into police custody. Hopefully, this is the end of that story. Hopefully, the beginning of the end of that story. I'm sure we haven't seen the last of Bobby, but I hope we've seen the last of him for now, because we need to see the last of her now, because the storyline is absolutely absurd. Some other stories going on. Speaking of Prince, he did end up marrying Olivia. This is despite the fact that Olivia had been feeling like Prince was pushing her away and not giving her enough attention right before the wedding, that Olivia decided to act like she was the bridesmaid and not the bride to his brother Hunter, who had never met her, and they end up sleeping together. And despite Prince finding out about this, he still marries her and then decides to dump her at the reception, which I thought was weird. Like, why even marry her in the first place if you're just going to dump her at the reception? I think that was stupid writing there. What else is new? The whole Warren story has been going on. Norma's been trying to be a match for Warren. He's dying. Norma is a match for Warren, but Grace paid someone off to make it seem like she is not a match and to try and keep Warren dying, because Grace is trying to take over Norma's turf here. You know, she's been the big bad on the scene lately, and now for whatever reason Grace has decided to get back into the game and try and take over. I mean, I guess it fits, but I feel like Grace has kind of been out of the game for a couple years now, so her doing all this is kind of an extreme jump in character. I think it's kind of like devolving her, but I don't hate this story as much as others on this show, even though I do think this story is also a little over the top. Mason, who's been tied to Eric in the whole incel story, he kept trying to get Ella to go out with him, and that didn't ever work out. And then he tries again at a party, and that doesn't work, so he runs into a drunk Leah and ends up making it seem like they slept together, even though they didn't. So that, of course, turned even more people against Mason when the truth came out about that. And then I would say the other main story is, of course, Juliet and her cancer, which she's been lying to Nadira and Perry about having it, or just not telling them that she has it. Instead, it's just been lying to them because both of them have had a relationship with her over this past year. It's kind of been the whole love triangle situation. They both end up dumping her at the beginning of the month, which I think was the logical step to that story, similar to that of the Bold and the Beautiful. You know, it's funny that young adults on Hollyoaks have more logic than old-ass adults on Bold and the Beautiful, but that's a whole other story. In the end, though, she does tell them both about the cancer. Perry's still upset with her, but at least that finally got out. I did like the scenes between Perry and Warren. You know, they both are dying, kind of. You know, Juliet's fighting for her life, though, and Warren's kind of giving up because he doesn't have a match. But those two had an interesting scene together. I thought that was an interesting match to put those two together in a scene. And it does fit because of their situations. But yeah, overall, Hollyoaks in 6th place. The Bobby story brings the show down immensely, in my opinion. Even though the Eric story tries to keep it interesting. I do think Hollyoaks as a whole is still entertaining. I just wish it had more of a focus. I've been saying this all year. It needs more focus. It needs less storylines. There's too many things going on at once. But overall, it gets 6th place for the month. Would be lower, but Home and Away is on break in December, so it's not a part of the rankings this month.